What is going on, gamers, men of war gamers, any other war gamers out there? Is not just men of war, but any World War II gamers out there, any, I don't know who else would be out there. Definitely board gamers, uh, war gamers, military historians, layman military historians, World War II buffs, um, anyone who's interested in history of warfare. Welcome to another video here. Hope you're having a nice day. And so we are back. I am actually re-recording this file because last time my audio quality was really bad. So I'm just going to start all over, but I still have the log file. I can show you all what happened. This turn, I don't think too much happened because we're in the month of March. And so the progress is slow. That's what I'm trying to get at. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and start the file. Basically I'm doing this the Russian production, Soviet production. I think in this turn we do end up launching some pretty nice Soviet winter offensives, and this is really the last push by the Red Army before the spring thaw will set in by the next month. You can pull up the table here. It's going to be the month of this is the Western Front. If we go to the Eastern Front, right here, you can see that it's a guaranteed month of mud. It's the only month in the whole game that's guaranteed to be mud on the Eastern Front. I guess on the Western Front, the winter isn't as bad. So the game describes the Western Front weather, even the winter, as mud, which is kind of odd because I would think that you would have. It was very snowy in say the Battle of the Bulge, but I guess the visibility was so bad. It was pretty much the equivalent of the spring thaw rainy season, something like that. That's my guess, but anyways, I digress. And so yeah, anyways, doing Soviet production, I'm pretty much skipping through the file. But we're really focusing on Soviet HQ builds, trying to build up some ground units wherever I can. The Western Allied powers have a huge surplus of production. They have like 83 production. So, I just went ahead and built them up. Maybe this is how I should do the video files because I'm realizing that I can skip through a lot. I don't know if y'all are as interested in watching me actually play the game, or a quick review would be preferable because I know that most players tend to play faster than I do from my experience. But another thing to point out, in the month of March 1944, the U.S. does get a new field HQ. This is big because I think so far the Allied powers have had 3 field HQs. We've only been actively using 2 throughout the whole game, and that's been this 21st Army Group, this British field HQ, and then this other one, the 15th. I've been using them throughout the whole African campaign, as you've been seeing. But the American field HQ, there was another one somewhere here. Oh yeah, this First Army, I haven't actually deployed. I was actually hoping to deploy it into Italy, but then I realized, we already have 2 HQs over here. Might as well balance it out. And so now we have 2 HQs in Britain, in addition to the HQs in the Mediterranean, or now just southern Western Front. And so now the idea is we have enough offensive potential. Once this HQ is built up to full strength, we have enough HQ command power to attack the Axis powers with amphibious invasions, either from the Western Front, across across the Atlantic body of water, and essentially into France or anywhere else that we decide to attack. It could be Belgium, it could be Amsterdam, it could be Denmark, it could even be Norway, or we can continue our drive through the Mediterranean. And I'm thinking, we'll do something pretty much the equivalent of what we saw historically, and I'm going to try to, attack from both directions. And even if the Italian campaign is like a squander, I still think there's an interest for us to invade Greece, maybe. I know that Churchill had a big interest in Greece, Yugoslavia, perhaps. We'll see how it goes, but I'm going to save that for later files. Once June 1944 comes around, then it should be a pretty exciting month because as much as I love the Eastern Front, the reason why I love the Eastern Front so much is because it was World War II at scale. It's just huge scale. And believe it or not, but the Western Front also carries that scale. I think most of us think of the giant bomber formations, or maybe the giant fleets of these naval convoys that were moving across, or maybe the U-boat formations, perhaps, or aircraft carriers in the Pacific Theater. I know that was a really big one. Was kind of what got me into World War II. But I think when it comes to just manpower, the Eastern Front still dominates. Perhaps the Sino-Japanese War has a lot of manpower as well. And so, the Western Front has some of that, but it's just not as consistent as it was on the Eastern Front. So, Battle France, such a fascinating battle, let me tell you. And I've been playing some files solo, on the side, and I could make a full Battle France video at some point. Feel free to let me know if that's what you want to see in the future. But my overall plan is that I think once I'm done with this series, I'm probably going to stop for a little while until I'm able to get a few other things done. But I'm not done with the Eurofront just yet. I think just in the long term. But anyways, we got another field HQ, and we can use it for the June campaign, which I'm excited for. So we'll continue on. And then I guess we'll now switch over to Axis production. I'm seeing Axis pieces moving around. And the Axis have a surplus. I basically have this. The Axis did sustain some notable casualties on the Eastern Front. The equivalent of 4 or 5 corps have been destroyed throughout the winter period, which is not too bad, I guess. I mean, it is the equivalent to another Stalingrad, right? But I think at this point, it's fair to say that the casualties at Stalingrad were not that high relative to the rest of the war, in my opinion. I know that may be a controversial statement, but I think I have some data to back that up. Eventually I will. And I'm really speaking from the German perspective. Again, it's hard to say. But, when you look at the attritional nature of the war, from 1943 onwards, I mean, the Germans were losing hundreds of thousands of troops every few months, I'm pretty sure. But that's the kind of data that I still would like to know more about. Because it's one thing to lose all your army in one critical, decisive battle, set-piece battle that everyone can associate and classify. It's another thing to understand that, through a slow, monotonous grind of attrition, you can still sustain terrifically heavy losses. But from the war room, from the generals, from the map, the front line doesn't look like it changed at all. Complete and total stalemate, but at the front line you have this grinding tactical attrition, and it's like living. I mean, if you ever just like explore this stuff as a military historian or historian of war, just trying to understand what combat is like. Speaking as a non-military person, I gotta tell you that it really was like, whoa. It really was like intense. And I mean, there's so much source material that you can use, you can turn to. Obviously, you got war films. I don't necessarily recommend war films because there's a lot of artistic interpretation to what war is like, including in this game, by the way. And so, I would try to stay away from war films. Some films do it really well. I guess you can go on YouTube and like look up what veterans think about like actual films. But I know that the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan was very well done. Saving Private Ryan to me is an incredibly great film. It's one of the best World War II films around. So I highly recommend that one. But there are still some things that don't make sense. Even from a historical standpoint. Like the battle that they had at the end was really cool, but there were some things that didn't make much sense, I don't think. But it was pretty cool still. Cinematically, it was very cool. The Mustangs coming in at the end, and air power dominating, but it wasn't so simple as that. So I want to say that. But there's other qualities of the war to look at. It's not just the combat side. I would say that there's some good books as well. And I don't know how many I can recommend because I haven't read too many, frankly. But I've actually the book that comes to mind to me the most to describe at least war from more of a psychological perspective. There's a lot more material I can recommend on that. A good film would be The Pianist, but a good book would be The Things They Carried. And The Things They Carried is actually a book about the Vietnam War. So it's a different war, but you still have the gritty infantry tactics. And I guess over the years, I mean, I've just stumbled upon different source material. And a lot of it has been my own interpretation of it all. So, I think that's the part about war that makes it interesting, is that psychologically, I don't think anyone has a full comprehension of war, but people try really hard to. And if there's anybody who probably really does have a full comprehension of war, more or less, I would say it's the successful field commanders, the ones who've actually achieved success in war. They seem to have a deeper understanding. So your Alexander the Great types, and any other famous general that you can think of in human history. I'll probably say Hannibal. In World War II, you have many, Patton, Rommel, but I don't think any of their careers were considered full-out success stories. So you got to look at the individual battles instead. But the point I'm trying to make is that there's a lot of aspects to warfare. Anyways, so this game, simple depiction, strategic game. This is more analogous to a chessboard than say a Dungeons and Dragons, or World War II reenactment sort of thing. So anyways, we're gonna start the turn. I'll switch over to Soviet side. Maybe it would be kind of cool to watch the game from a neutral perspective. We can even try that. But the Soviets are attacking. Maybe I do that. Now, it is a tutorial series, so I don't think I will, actually. Because technically, you guys are still trying to learn how to play. So I will show, like, the unit types. But I think for future videos that I do, I may go full Fog of War. Because, I mean, that's how the game is meant to sort of be played. So anyways, we're going to do the Blitz, Baltic HQ here. We're going all out on Smolensk. And I got to remember that I already played the file. I know what happens, but you guys do not. So, I'm going to go in slow, but, there's a number of Soviet attacks. We're doing 2 Soviet blitzes. That's already a notable thing. And we are now attacking, continuing this drive, this Operation Red Dwarf is what I called it, to drive the German army out of this here peninsula. And I think we've driven them about maybe 50% of the way there. I mean, originally they were pretty far out, about 2 hexes away, and we've definitely pushed them down, but we've sustained heavy losses, and the German counterattacks have clearly created a stalemate, have really slowed down our progress for sure. The Germans did, for every Soviet offensive, there was an equivalent German counterattack basically, and eventually, only on this turn do we not see a German counterattack. So, and I think we still do at some point. So, anyways. We're going to do these attacks. We're doing these blitzes. Let's see how what ends up happening. Do a few strategic moves with Stavka, because I have 2 more HQs in reserve, meaning that if I get more snow on the second fortnight, I can still keep attacking, and that was the idea. Make sure that the Soviets go all out on this turn, so that next month they can focus on replenishing their casualties and preparing for the summer campaign of 1944, which won't be easy against the German army, especially considering that the Germans can still launch their own offensive. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, I'm shuffling pieces around, making some final adjustments, and now basically, doing a few extra adjustments here, trying to make sure that I'm really optimizing the placement of my units. I think I decided to withdraw my units at Kamenskoye. I had a beachhead there, but I decided, we're going to abandon the beachhead, because I think, first of all, the beachhead is very vulnerable to a German counterattack. I don't want to deal with any of that. And in order to deny the Germans the ability to actually break through and push onto this rail link, right? There's this rail link that you have going from Solsk to Stalingrad. And it's the only rail line, that and also this one here, but it kind of stops abruptly right here, because, the Germans occupied Kamenskoye. But this is the only rail line that is actually supplying some of our advancing Soviet formations, like this 10th Corps 1st Shock Army and 11th Guard Army, these 3 units, the hex distance for your supplies is 2 hexes away. And so, when you look at the railhead, the nearest railhead is right here where it says Dawn, right? This is the nearest railhead. I have another railhead. There's another railhead that is coming from Orozonikice, but it stops abruptly right here where you see this level 0 HQ. I can zoom in. And all these other rail centers, rail junctions, are currently controlled by the German army. So part of the Soviet objective in this blitz is to drive the German army out of these areas like Armavir and Kropotkin, because, the Soviets already pushed on this the last turn. They faced a nasty German counteroffensive. So now they kind of have to try again, I think. That's what I remember. Or at the very least, we saw a Soviet push on Armavir, and it was smashed by the German counteroffensive. So it's been tough. It's been a tough campaign. I would love to do like maybe a time lapse to see this campaign. This has probably been the coolest campaign. The coolest from an operational perspective, not just from a strategic perspective, but actually looking at the tempo and the mechanics of the movement of units, kind of like in a chessboard when you're trying to outflank your opponent and like try to dominate the center of the board, or maybe trying to, attack a flank, we've seen, all these mechanisms that have been going on. That's my favorite part of this game. I like to think of it as almost like, particle collisions, in some sort of sense, in some sort of analogy, or like for anybody who plays pool, the way the billiard balls, make contact, but this time you have like a dozen or so of them happening, more or less all at once. So anyways, I'm going to mark the airstrikes very soon. But I decided to pull my units out of this area because, our Soviet offensive there just completely was a total dud. Not a single German unit was destroyed or damaged, barely. Maybe 1 hit, 2 hits, while we sustained some pretty significant hits ourselves. So I decided to withdraw. Now, it took me a while to find the right combination because I wanted to make sure I had a defense in depth because, if the German army does break through, we're going to be in deep doo-doo if this rail line is contested for whatever reason. So I really wanted to make sure I had a defense in depth, and it took me a while to figure out the best combo. But I think I concede to having this set up here. It's only 3 Soviet mech, the equivalent of 3, I believe, mech divisions that would be here. I think these are divisions, right? They're mech corps. Excuse me. This is not a mech corps technically, or maybe it is. It's hard to say. Again, the way the game scales the Soviet unit types, but this is either, I think the closest thing to describe as a unit type is not a mech army because those didn't exist, but this would actually be a Soviet cluster of mech corps. So I would call it a mech corps group, which would be the equivalent of a mech army. But the Soviets don't actually have mech armies. But these formations were actually attached, these extra mech corps, or it could have been rifle mech corps or rifle motorized corps, maybe even some tank corps. But they were essentially specialized, much more motorized, not just motorized, but mechanized formations. And basically they were meant to support the main Soviet armies, and so that's the idea, right? The 20th Army, these units would be subordinate to the Soviet 20th Army that you see here, right? And all these other units are just supporting this one Soviet army in the sector. So, anyways, I just found that kind of interesting. This game doesn't really show that, but we can definitely take a deeper dive. There's other good YouTube channels. I think it's called Eastery. And this guy does an incredible animation of all the operations. And you can see more of what I'm talking about in his animation there. Also, the World War II channel also does a really great job. I think they collab together. And Eastery made all the animations for the World War II channel. And they're just like chef's kiss. So anyways, we're going to do the battles. I think already, some German units here are taking hits. We do have this German field HQ at the front line. I did it there to kind of intimidate the Soviets a bit. But some exchanges happen here. Roughly equal exchange, I think, happens. No Soviet breakthroughs, though, happen. That's the main takeaway. But let's check out this battle here at Smolensk. Soviets have a lot of double fire. Germans, 2 of their units are breaking point. They reinforced with 1 Hungarian army. And they also got this fortress unit, which is now at a level 2 instead of a level 3. And as you will see very soon, Soviets do sustain some casualties, but they still have 12 double fire dice. And as the Soviets respond, you'll see very soon, we just inflicted some pretty notable casualties. Keep in mind that this German fortress unit has 3 triple defense. And because it has 3 triple defense, it absorbs 3 hits. So even though the Germans lost only like what looked like 3 hits, I think technically it was a total of 5 hits or 6 hits. So it was a lot of hits, and half of them were absorbed by that 1 fortress unit. But now, if you look at the HP, the health of these German cluster, or this Axis cluster, you're going to see that this is 1 point. 1 hit plus another 3. That's 5 hits left. They are able to sustain 5 more hits before the Red Army breaks through, and so we'll see if they can do that on the Blitz phase. So that's what we're doing now, is the Blitz phase. Just shuffling around units. I think I pull out some of the infantry, and instead I substitute that with a First Guard tank army. That's what this is. And the tank army is comprised of a lot of Soviet tank divisions, and I believe tank corps as well, right? The tank divisions were subordinate to tank corps. At least that's how it was in 1941, and I think part of 1942. But keep in mind that the tank armies didn't exist in 1941. So you only had, the largest tank formation you had was the tank corps. I don't even think they were called tank corps. I think they were called mech corps, and then you had tank divisions in the mech corps. But the tank armies, these came about, I believe, they participated in the counteroffensive at Stalingrad, Operation. I believe it was in part they participated in Operation Mars near Moscow, but also Operation Jupiter and Operation Operation Jupiter. I think I just made up. Maybe I should look this stuff up to kind of get a clearer sense, right? Let me see. Operation Jupiter, 1942. Let me see. I feel like I need to know. Operation Jupiter, this happened in Norway, and it was a plan to invade Norway by the Allied forces in World War II. So it had nothing to do with the Soviet army. So Operation Saturn was definitely one of them. Operation Little Saturn, that's the little one. So Operation Little Saturn, I guess, is little because it was designed to encircle Stalingrad. And that was the main encirclement operation that occurred, was at Stalingrad. Right here. Right there. Boom. So that yellow was Operation Little Saturn. And then you have Operation Uranus. And that, I believe, was the follow-up that expanded and basically overran the remainder of the Red Army. Or, the remainder of Army Group South. I might be mixing up the two. Based off of the images, I think I got the two confused. I think Operation Uranus might be the one that encircled Stalingrad. And then the next one was, I guess, if you think about it in the constellation sense, Operation Uranus would be the first one. Then it's followed by Operation Little Saturn. I would have expected it to be followed up by an Operation Jupiter after Little Saturn. And then eventually you would have had Operation Mars. And I guess Operation Jupiter would have happened were it not for Manstein's counteroffensive that occurred, that basically halted the link between Operation Mars and Operation Little Saturn. That's what I'm thinking. Operation Little Saturn. That's what I'm thinking. It's hard to tell. They seem to be the same offensive, more or less. No, but I think Operation Little Saturn is the extension. Hmm. Yeah, the goal, plan an ambitious offensive with Rostov on Don as the ultimate objective, right? The city of Rostov, codenamed Saturn. And I guess it sort of formed, or no, they changed it to Little Saturn. So that's all really interesting. Battle of Stalingrad's a really interesting period because of how mobile the campaign was. With the Soviet offensive, that's where things get really interesting. But it is still very complicated. But I think the best YouTube channel would be to check out TIK, the Imperial Knight, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's done the deepest analysis of Stalingrad, the longest analysis of Stalingrad, with the most amount of information of any documentary series, and he covers pretty much the whole battle, and it's really good. It's really well done, really animated and everything. So, anyways. I'm going to go ahead and continue the file. The Blitz phase, as you saw, we're not done yet. But before I actually start doing the Soviet offensive, I decided I'll do a few Allied operations and go ahead and try to make more progress on Sardinia and Sicily and try to knock Italy out of the war. We're trying to create that war wariness and force Italy to surrender. And so I wanted to see that. But we're now going to go. Now I switch back to the Eastern Front. And, doing the battle, we'll do the blitz here at Smolensk, and the Soviets just end up smashing, I believe. Yep, just like that. They end up getting. You can see here on the top left. Let me turn on my little highlighter marker too. Here we go. This little. If you look here on the top left, you can see, since we have all these double fire units, 2 shock armies, a Soviet tank army, and supported by several Soviet tank corps or mech corps. They're all double fire, and you can see here these were the 4 rolls of 3 cluster dice, and you can count how many hits are here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They score 7 hits with just their ground units, and I think previously they were even able to score a hit with air support. So the Soviet army just totally clean sweeps the German defense here at Smolensk, and it really, finally, the Red Army basically has demonstrated to have the at least at the tactical and operational level, the offensive potential to at least smash the German line, and using just the raw concentration of firepower, actually clear a hole, pave a lane for a Soviet strategic breakthrough. So arguably, one could even argue, given that the campaign of Smolensk has been going on since I think it started in July of 1941, so it's been almost now 3 years, a little under 3 years that the Battle of Smolensk has been going on in our game, and literally in just the span of finally one turn, I guess, in 2 weeks, in the span of 2 weeks, the Soviets smash, I would say, about 50% of the remaining defense. But obviously it took the whole winter campaign for them to steadily grind down the German defense of Smolensk. It took them several years, arguably, but as you saw recently, the Soviet offensives, we had to launch. This was not the first offensive at Smolensk, right? This was the 3rd or 4th I did using the Baltic HQ to finally smash. But this was the blitz. This was the first blitz we've done, and it finally paid off. So it goes to show that if you're patient with the Red Army in this game, you can still launch very effective offensive operations. And then I think I go ahead and do a few more battles here in the south. And you can see Soviets are taking some hits. They sustain slightly higher casualties. And then they are able, though, to inflict pretty notable casualties on the German army, including even damaging the HQ, which got caught up in the battle because, the Germans did sustain more or less about 50% of their combat power has been reduced in this battle. So it was significant. And so, yeah, that's the Soviet push. We can, I can show some of the Allied moves. And all I really do, I don't do much for that. We move on to now the next fortnight. This is now the second fortnight. Or no, I guess I'm still doing the German move. Yes, my mistake. So we should switch over to the Axis side while I'm at it. And the German response, I think, is really interesting in this game, or what I end up doing. But it is akin to the historical response, because a lot of it is I think is fundamentally done on some sort of game theory mechanic. So there is a degree of a way to model this stuff. It is probabilistic, but it's all probabilistic. And I'm not necessarily here to argue that you can model it accurately, or maybe I am trying to suggest that you can. But I think from the bits and pieces I've gathered from people who study military history, is that it is very possible to do a deep analysis on certain battles of human history. I think World War II is such a great environment to study these battles, because you have so many battles to study. There's too many, frankly. Too many just firefights that happen in World War II, to the point where I think it's almost like, I would almost say that you have to be almost considerate of your own mental health when you try to study a lot of this subject material, because I don't know how Indy Neidell or the Imperial Knight or David Glantz, I don't know, they don't really talk about it. They really don't. Sometimes they do, but I don't see enough of these historians talking about how it felt like to even read this stuff and learn about the stuff, like reading about the Holocaust. I mean, this shit, excuse me, but this shit is really heavy subject material, and it's borderline, I don't know. I mean, I can think of a lot of funny memes, though. I can think of a lot of memes to describe how I feel sometimes when I learn about some of these battles and these events, and all I can say is that I don't necessarily feel good when I learn when I learn of some of these like statistics, and especially when you read up about the blunders that were made. I mean, this is the whole thing that is World War I in a nutshell. World War I is like a place of a lot of blunders, and just so many men mostly. But not just men. There's, in this war, World War II shows that civilians were not, scot-free from being pulled into the war, and essentially as casualties, and essentially, shit gets real dark. That's all I'm trying to get at, especially on the Eastern Front, where the entire region was already deprived of like food and resources throughout the whole war, all of Europe. There's a whole nother side of World War II that people don't even know about, but I'm going to mention it real quick here. But it's amazing to realize how many people died of hunger in World War II. It wasn't just the Holocaust. People in India who weren't even fighting in the war necessarily. They had a few divisions. Actually, they had several divisions as part of the Commonwealth to fight off the Japanese, and they even fought against the Axis in North Africa. But essentially, we can even see the unit here. It's an Indian division. It's over here. I think it's over this one, right? There it is, right there. It's located in Habania. I'm pronouncing that right. But what I'm trying to get at is just logistics plays a big part in this war. And what was I trying to get at? I don't know. All I know is that just reading up on the battles is heavy enough for me. And that's probably the reason why, if I had to guess, why not many people know about some of these battles. It's not that like people, I don't think, are trying to disregard the bravery of the soldiers or anything like that. Quite the opposite. In fact, when you look at the history of Russia post World War II, right? I mean, the history of the Soviet Union is a lot about, a lot about talking about the war. They call it the Great Patriotic War, right? The Great Patriotic War of the Soviet Union, and yeah, it was a huge war. It's a monumental war. It was huge, colossal conflict. But the point here is that I think one of the reasons why not many people have looked into all these statistics, not as many as you would think. I don't think it's because people are not interested. I think it's because at some point, just like any other pile of statistics, you're just like, okay, I've had enough for the day. I've had enough statistics for the day. I'm going to call it a day. And that's not unique to just World War II. I'd say that's unique to statistics in general, because the nature of statistics is very, very numerically intensive. And numbers, some people are really good with numbers, but I would argue that numbers is one of those things that you kind of have to like really work hard to kind of be proactive about, right? I'm sure my audience can relate to this quite a bit, especially if you enjoy video games and you enjoy these board games. And I think part of the attraction is the stats, right? And just like, you may not even be doing the numbers, crunching the numbers in your mind, but I feel like many of us are just trying to kind of get a sense of the magnitude, and try to get a sense of the odds, right? Try to weigh the odds, especially when you're trying to play these battles and you're trying to create these formation types that can boost your chances of success. It's all about weighing the odds, right? So all that's really interesting to me. And I love how I think more people have done this analysis when it comes to studying like the Greek battles, the Macedonian battles, the Roman battles. I think that's where more attention has been dedicated. When I just look at the internet, I think more people have spent more time like deeply analyzing the battles of Julius Caesar and of Hannibal and of all these other like very unique battles that took place, because during those times, you could argue that the actual battles were a little bit more personal, but from a tactical standpoint, you could see the whites of their eyes, as the saying goes. You could see, you can make eye contact with your opponent. I think World War II, you do have a lot of making eye contact with the infantry combat. But there's also a whole another side of infantry combat where the firing distances are literally kilometers across, and so when you look at the way the tank combat happens, when you look at the way air power and artillery battles took place, a lot of indirect fire happens, especially in modern war. Nowadays we have even drones, right? So the technology obviously plays a role in all of this, and I think the initial impression is for people to presume that it kind of makes the war more inhumane, perhaps. I mean, I think all human warfare is brutal, frankly, but I disagree. I think people are smart enough to get a sense of what's going on, especially when you're getting shelled by artillery or something like that. It's like, why would they do that? They're doing that because they're trying to neutralize the targets. They're trying to kill you, right? So this whole thing, and I think I turn to World War I a lot. I think World War I is more easily understood by the general public because it was such an extreme of what I'm talking about. When you look at what was going on the Western Front, and just how the war literally churned the soil into no man's land, you get so much more of that in World War I, because that front line was there for so long, right? But in World War II, you have, I would say, the siege of Leningrad was probably more of that sort of grinding war. And if there was any sort of World War I example that we can turn to here, it was Battle of Smolensk, right? Nearly three years in length. Battle of Smolensk, right? Just grinding attrition, probably akin to World War I. But I would argue that the artillery and the tanks were way more advanced in this conflict than, say, World War I. World War I tanks weren't very good. World War I artillery was brutal. Right. Anywhere else on this front, I don't necessarily would say it's the same, because you have a lot more maneuver going on, but the maneuver is happening at a smaller scale. And this game doesn't show it. But if you play like Gates of Hell, you have all these Panzer, platoons that you can command. There's several other games out there. I think another one is combat missions. The more simulator types. I digress. So, moving along. German response, though, really interesting, because what I did was, I think this makes sense, but I decided to create just a strategic defense in depth. And that's exactly what I do. So I transfer a bunch of units. I use all my supreme moves, and it takes me a while to figure out the right combo. But I basically try to create a defense in depth everywhere. I'm not trying to stop the Soviet breakthrough. I'm just trying to contain it just enough so that we can wait until mud and then eventually summer to counterattack. And I did decide to transfer over at least one of the SS corps, so now there's two. And then this SS corps and this infantry kind of got weighed down over here. Both sides sustained some pretty heavy casualties there. So this time around, the Soviets did pretty well. I remember we tried in the first winter campaign. It didn't work. This time, I think it worked. That's good. And that was overall part of the strategy at grinding down at Smolensk. We had to push on the flank to contain the German reserves. So it was interesting. I had fun doing it. I'm sure if you ever play this game, or if you play any other war game where you're trying to build a good strategy and actually implement that operation or implement your strategic operation, when it succeeds, I gotta say it is very satisfying. So anyways, nice little hit of dopamine there. So I'm going to go ahead, do these German moves. The overall plan was just to pull back. I'm leaving behind some German rear guards. I decided, you know what, it's worth it to leave behind the rear guards because the goal is to buy time. I'm also starting to pull back out here in this peninsula because, you know, as long as we don't lose Batumi, we should be able to sustain our situation here for the rest of the war. But I'm thinking, let me at least fortify Tuops. You know, I'm not sure what my game plan is over here. But overall, I know that these units at some point are going to have to pull back. This German army group is going to have to pull back across the Kirk Straits, and it's a very narrow corridor, right? And so I don't know how quickly I can move my units back, but I think my plan for the rest of the campaign is to fortify Novorossiysk. I think we're going to fortify there, try to fortify these two areas. Kind of create a Krasnodar Peninsula like we had historically. It took a long time for the Soviets to retake Novorossiysk and drive them out of this area. And then, of course, you know, as long as we don't lose Sevastopol, we can leave our units in Batumi almost indefinitely. And I kind of want to do that just because it would be a really cool sort of siege war sort of situation. Kind of analogous to what the British were doing, the British Empire did so often throughout their conquest of the world. You know, like a mini Hong Kong. Instead, we'll call it a mini Batumi, but it's like a offensive forward operating base basically. So, anyways, activating Army Group North now. I'm going to deploy it from Vodoshilevgrad, and I decided to try to do a blitz. And my idea was just to smash this Soviet cluster here, and then reshuffle my units to put more pressure on the Soviet northern flank. And so I did decide to do another blitz while I was at it. I felt like I had the extra resources to do that. And so I do the blitz. Unfortunately, the blitz does not break through. And I felt like my line was a little too vulnerable over here. You know, we have a gaping hole at Kupiansk. So unfortunately, yeah, see, only 2 hits on the Soviets. I could have pressed on, and had I pressed on, there was still a pretty good chance of me breaking through. But I figured it's better if we shuffle our units back to a defensive position and just make sure that we're nice and hunkered down for whatever the Soviets have planned next. In fact, I even fall back a little bit just to make sure that the Red Army can't break through on this turn in that sector. Because you never know, right? You just never know. And then we'll do the Red Army Blitz. This is the last blitz of the turn. And then we'll wrap up the file here, wrap up the video here. If you've enjoyed this stuff, you know, definitely give it a like, I guess. You know, I try not to get into the whole algorithm thing. But it at least, or you can comment below, anything like that gives me feedback, right? You know, gives me it lets me know that people are enjoying it. But from what I can tell, I mean, even though I upload a video every now and then, I'm not uploading like all that much. I do feel like at least a handful of people out there, a few dozen of y'all, seem to actually enjoy this stuff, enjoy these games as much as I do. You know, I know that these are not the most popular games ever, but the subject matter I feel like can be so much deeper, just like something that we could talk about a lot more in general, you know, and unfortunately it's just not as common. I think people would argue that this sort of analysis is more common in sports. You know, I know that in the wrestling community, in football, right, especially football with the gladiator like formations, right, or they're literally the Roman. You know, they got the Roman lines. So I would say that American football, if there's any place in American culture where I see the so-called like art of war being studied in the physical form, it's American football. Maybe even soccer, really all the sports. But I find the study of the actual battles with the weapons that they used to be really fascinating, right? I'm sure you can tell already. And I'm not the only one. So a lot of humans. I mean, there's a whole philosophical side of the art of war that probably even has a deeper calling. But I would turn to the latest film, like It's All Quiet on the Western Front, the one that's in German. I highly recommend that film because they still had an artistic interpretation. Don't think of it as 100% historically accurate combat, but there were some scenes in that film where, I mean, I think they aced it. I mean, it was such a cinematically impressive film, and it wasn't too CGI crazy. Like, a lot of it felt like it was like practical effects. It was a masterpiece. That was a masterpiece film. I didn't expect it to be that good. I went in. I enjoyed the original version a lot. The original version was also really good, and I was expecting something more like that. And I think the original had more of a realism side of it, but this one was more willing to show like the intense side of the war. I mean, they both were incredibly done. They both were incredibly well done. And there were some intense scenes. I highly recommend it. Obviously, you have to be of age to watch the film. Okay. So I don't know how many. Yeah. It's rated R. Okay, adults only. So, with that said, I basically do now a blitz here in the Western Front or Western Sector, whatever you want to call it. And I was very excited for this blitz because I wanted to just like, completely like send the floodgates of Soviet formations and kind of do what we saw in the post-Stalingrad situation, essentially do the equivalent of a little Saturn. And, right, was it a little Saturn? Yeah, it would have been the equivalent of a little Saturn. But I mean, obviously in hindsight, I knew that, the Germans have a lot of reinforcements. Presumably, I'm assuming that the Germans have an SS formation somewhere. And I figured, it's not worth it for me to lose a tank corps, especially because of this hedgerow, or I don't know what to call it. It might be a swamp, swamp line, this forest line, this tree line, whatever it is. I believe it is a river line, actually. These units, are going to only be able to attack these areas all by themselves, and I would be able to send some air support, and that's it. And neither unit is, I don't think, strong enough to attack on its own like that. I mean, maybe I could gamble with a cavalry corps, but I decided no. I don't want to lose any Soviet formations this time around, so I decided to be a little bit more conservative, and I went ahead and I, basically cleared out this area here with whatever units I had. And then I tried to actually launch a blitz on Bryansk. And I could only send 2 units at a time. So I decided, let me launch an all-out blitz on Bryansk and see if I can capture the city, even though it's an urban center. Let me see if I can capture the city in one swift attack. And I decided to go for it. Unfortunately, the Soviets sustained heavy casualties. Right, the Romanians scored 2 hits. The Romanians do sustain 1 hit, though. The air power completely missed. That's part of the reason why the Soviets didn't score any hits. The air power pretty much failed. Over here, this other blitz, I was trying to secure Admavid, right? Retake Admavid and try to secure this rail line like I was talking about earlier. And we do. We at least take Kropotkin, no problem there. And then I push on Admavid, and I don't think we actually succeed in the first attack, no. But then I go ahead and do the blitz phase again. And this time I go all out on Ahmadvid. I send in 2 more units, including 2 Soviet, or I guess another Soviet cavalry, infantry, and a total of 2 Soviet tank armies are now pushing on Ahmadvid. And then I decide, since these other units are under strength, they're at level 2, most of them. I say, we're not going to push any further. We're just going to probably call it here. We did. If we can take out Ahmadvid, we will have secured the rail line, and my supplies will be in good order. And that was the idea. And I was thinking about attacking, but I decided against it. And then over here, we stock up more units, sending in another tank army and a full infantry army. So plenty of Soviet units to retake Bryansk. And then, go ahead and do that, And I think the battle on Ahmadvid, And unfortunately, that's right. The Battle of Armavir, it unfortunately fails. The Germans do score some more hits. You can see that the Soviet units are now at level 2. So we fail to take Armavir, meaning that we still need this northern rail line, the one from Smolensk to Stalingrad, as the rail line to supply our spearhead units over here. But all the other formations are in supply. That's good. And it's going to be mud, so I'm not really worried about a German counteroffensive. I think the attack on Bryansk goes a little better. No, the Soviets' attack also on Bryansk more or less fails. So unfortunately, the second wave of the Soviet blitz in this turn, we did get winter weather. So that's the good news. But despite the weather advantage, we didn't really. We made some headway, but the results were like mixed results. I would say I would argue that this entire campaign was more or less. I would say the Stalingrad campaign. I would say it was a marginal victory. I would have said we'll say it was a major victory. It would have been a decisive victory if they had taken Bryansk, but they didn't. Likewise, over here in this campaign, I would say that this campaign was overall a Soviet marginal victory because they sustained the amount of Soviet casualties they sustained were very high. So were the German casualties. Relatively speaking, the Germans did lose several units in the process. So both sides lost units, but the Soviets lost more, I'm pretty sure. And so that's why I would say it was a Soviet marginal victory. But they still made progress, but they didn't even achieve the strategic objective. But overall they made progress, right? So that's that. That's going to sum up the second fortnight there. And if I continue on with the file, we do decide to do more campaign on Sicily. I even decided to activate this HQ for a second time, which I didn't want to do because I wanted to have it at full strength to attack other places. But my attempts to be economical in Sardinia completely fail because, unfortunately, these French units. Oh, I also am transferring units towards Persia because I need to retake Tehran if I want to be able to send the Lend-Lease to the Soviet Union. Because right now the Axis control Tehran. There is a revolt over there. In Persia, and then in Persia, Tehran, I can roll my R's, and then Murmansk has also been Axis controlled, and so we cannot send Lend-Lease that way neither. And so until the Soviet army retakes both areas, our Lend-Lease is limited for the rest of the game. But if we continue, I do take Sicily. I try to put pressure on this Italian unit. We do wipe it out. I launched a big attack here with all these, British and American units to attack Olbia against this one Italian division. This Italian division has been holding out for 2-3 months now, and they refused to surrender. These Italians were very brave. Against incredible odds, the Allied ground forces just keep failing, and they do not succeed at taking Olbia. All their attacks just do not succeed. It blows my mind how long it took for us to destroy this one unit, given the amount of resources I put in. It's ridiculous. But that one division held out. But I did make a roll. I mean, there were so many Allied ports under Allied control now. I mean, we control 5 ports now by the end of this turn, plus the fact that we did neutralize a few Italian units. The war weariness of Italy was more than the roll of 6 for a die. And so because of that, Italy ends up surrendering finally on this turn. When I do the political roll, they finally surrendered. Because you have to roll a value that is equal or lower than that war weariness. And that war weariness was finally 6 and above. So it was a guarantee that no matter what I rolled with that die, boom, you would end up with that surrender. And Italy finally surrenders, and that's what you see happening here. I'll play it one more time, the sequence. But finally, including the 7th Italian division there, lucky 7th, it surrenders, finally. It surrenders because the rest of Italy surrenders. And all the Italian units on the map disappear. But the crazy part is that from the Allied perspective, that surrender is not all that impressive, meaning that all these other units in the north are presumably German. And if I unhide them real quick, you can see that they're all gray and black. These are all Wehrmacht formations. So the Germans have set up a fortress Italy, if you will, but the slightly southern end is vulnerable. But I think they're willing to give up the ground, let the Allies come to them. We also did a Italian revolt, and I decided to put it in Taranto, because is there a Toronto in Canada? Right, Toronto, Canada. Toronto. Okay, with only O's, and then over here, this is Taranto, not Toronto. Taranto. Excuse me. But anyways, basically, Italians revolt, couple extra ports under Allied control, and so now most of Italy's out of the war finally, and so now it's cool because these two Allied HQs can now pretty much focus on some other target in the southern hemisphere, and so stay tuned for that. Now I do decide to activate OKW. Oberkommando des Wehrmacht, right? If I'm pronouncing that right. And I decided, you know what, we're going to fortify Yugoslavia. I'm going to do that preemptively. So I decided to deploy some of these units over here. And I'm just going to fortify the mountains in Yugoslavia. Ideally, all the mountain areas are occupied because you do not want to deal with the Yugoslavian partisans. And I may do that in this game and just occupy the entire country. But I decided, you know what, we're going to occupy all the bodies of water, because I know that the Allies can land very far north. You know, they have naval supremacy, so their range is doubled, and they could land. I mean, they can land as far north as Trieste. And I've played a game where literally the amphibious landing happened in Ravenna, and like they ended up flanking my entire Italian defense, and they pushed through Austria of all places. They pushed through Austria and through northern Italy before to get to Germany. It was ridiculous. So you do not want to underestimate the Allied ability to push through this area. So I decided to do old-fashioned, just occupy the nation of Yugoslavia. If I had 4 more units, I could then guarantee that the partisans won't even be a nuisance. So you need a huge axis presence of units to occupy just Yugoslavia. I mean, these units, I think there's more units in Yugoslavia than there are in northern France, for goodness sakes. So a lot of units there. I also have a lot of units in Italy as well. And I think with that, I do make a few more moves. And I decided to create this Gustav line that goes from Pescara, Cassino, and then this area here north of Naples. Also, Naples is also fortified as well. So we have super strong defense in southern Italy. All the other amphibious invasion sites will have to go against whatever we have hidden here. And then that pretty much sums up this file. So yeah, that's going to be it. So the Allies finally making progress. Italy surrenders. Soviets take Smolensk. Oh man, I hope I'm not being too loud with the microphone again. I probably was. Oopsie daisies. But hopefully, I think that, irrelevant of audio quality, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you for your patience if my audio quality wasn't very good. This is now my second attempt doing this recording, so I don't think I'm going to do it a third time. So this will be it. But we have a few more files to go, about maybe 12, 13 more. I think a little bit more. I think we have about 14 more files, 14 more videos before the series ends. And so we still got 1944 and 1945. The war is not over yet. This is where the war really will probably intensify. And I really want to see what the Western Allied powers and the Soviets can do in 1944 and 45 as the German industry begins to get weighed down by the strategic pressure, whether it's production or strategic bombing, are both going to have major handicaps for the German army. So that's it. Then I just deactivate the HQs, and that's the end of the file. So I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.